For our first speaker, we have Carmen Jones. She's the assistant breeder with the University of Arkansas, and she's going to give us an update on cultivars for the Southeast. So Carmen, welcome.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being here this morning. I know it wasn't easy to make it to the ferry and get all the way across the pond and all that, so I'm glad you're here and thanks for having me. My name is Carmen Jones. I'm the assistant fruit breeder at the University of Arkansas. I have been with the program for about 6 years now, 2 years in this position that I'm in right now. And I want to share with you guys today a little update on what we've been doing this year and just do an overview of the cultivars that we've produced for the Southeast. So the 2024 Blackberry season was really kind to us. We finally had a winter that didn't have an erratic swing in temperatures or extreme lows. And so we were able to get a pretty good picture of what was going on in our selections this season. We didn't have any late spring frost this year either, and that's something that usually pushes our season back. So we ran 10 to 14 days early. It was a blessing and a curse. We got to see everything. We weren't exactly prepared to get into it so soon, so we had to kind of scramble, but we got it together and pulled out a good season. It was an incredibly hot and dry summer. We got a little bit of rain in the beginning of June at our site, and then up until probably the first week of September, we didn't have anything substantial. That's pretty unusual for our location. We're in northwest Arkansas, or like kind of north central Arkansas. And we usually get quite a bit of rain during the season, and we don't grow in tunnels in our area, so it kind of limits what we can see. So we got to see really nice fruit quality. We made 107 new selections this year. That's quite a lot. When Dr. Clark was running the program, he was averaging about 60 a year. So we've had a good chance to see a lot of our new floricane fruiting stuff. We got 48 new selections out of that, and then we got 59 new primocane fruiting selections. A couple years ago, we had some drought set in, and that seemed to set us back, so we put drip irrigation in our selection field, and that helped us out a lot this year. We would have had a devastating year otherwise. It was a big year for progress. I think the most notable thing that I saw this season was the jump forward in primocane fruiting, like the expression of that characteristic and the uniformity throughout a plot. And so when I say that, I do mean like primocane fruit. So the improvement that we saw, like I said, we had a mild winter, so we didn't see a ton of cane damage. We didn't lose any of our early blooms. And then the ground warmed up pretty quick because we didn't have any late frost. So we had an early season that allowed us to see primocanes in a way that we don't always get to in Arkansas. If the ground warms up a little slower and we have a long spring, we tend to see that the primocanes come up later, and we miss the chance to see a good set because heat will set in before they start to bloom really well. So for that reason, we've also been focusing on early primocanes in our program. So we're looking for stuff that we can get in the hands of growers that they can get a quick turnaround on a crop and get something sort of predictable in a production cycle. We've started taking new data points to kind of aid in that effort. And we have been focusing on flavor and quality for primocanes too. That's getting pretty close to where we are with our floricane stuff. This year was the first year that we saw like really good, consistent sweet fruit on primocane fruiters throughout their entire season. And then we also have been working on yield potential. And so like I said, this is getting some uniformity into the primocane fruiters that we just haven't had in the past. You've probably seen, if you've ever grown like 45 or Horizon, that they'll sort of slowly switch over into primocane fruiting. So we're looking to get that trait to be a little bit more determinate. We also have this kind of like, I would say, a new trait that they sort of break their own apical dominance, and so they're like ultra branchy. And then like I said, we've been working on yield, and the way that we've been looking at this was looking at like cane emergence timing, so we've started taking data points for that. Percentage of canes flowering in a plot. Margaret's been capturing that while she's doing her breeder evaluations throughout the season. And then counting the number of fruits and flowers per inflorescence. And so we had a PhD student named Alexander Cordoba who's still with us, and he is wrapping up getting this data integrated into a genomic selection model to help us kind of move our program forward faster, hopefully. This is some of that ultra branchy material. So this is something that was not tipped. This is pretty unusual for us to see, that it wants to break the laterals all the way down the cane without somebody having to come through and manage it manually. That said, this is the first year we've looked at this. The wheels could fall off still. We don't know anything about the quality, but it's an exciting new characteristic that we're seeing. So we've also been pushing towards moving firmness forward in a way in our program that we hadn't done before. We used to rely on subjective ratings, and that's served a purpose. It gives us some picture, but we were looking to integrate like numbers, putting numbers to firmness that make sense and that we can breed for. So we have an undergraduate, or had an undergraduate student who was my intern for 2023 and 2024. His name is Reese Brock. He's just started a master's with us, actually, but he led this effort of surveying the entire program for firmness. So we went around to all 350 of our selection plots and collected fruit and ran samples. He also kind of has taken the lead on learning how to use the fruit firm in our program, and that's been something that has been useful. I think that we're getting meaningful data from it. If you're looking to know everything about firmness, you wouldn't use it, but if you're looking to just move a trait forward, this gives you an overarching picture. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. So the way that the data spreads out, it gives you like a linear regression model, and that's hard to use like as far as applying it to like how firm is that really. But the spread in our program, the least firm was 93 was the output, and 202 was the most firm. To give you guys a kind of a point of reference, Natchez fell around 105. Primark 45 was like 130. And our most firm thing out of our program was Immaculate, and it was like 156. And so that's our newest late season variety. We'll talk about that here in a second. I have a little video so you guys can see how this works. So in the past, our limiting factor has been having the time to measure this quickly on a lot of berries. We were using a TAXT Plus, and it took about 45 seconds a berry. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we probably did firmness on 5,000 to 10,000 berries this year. So that time adds up. We would have to have several full-time employees only doing that around the clock. So this thing will do 16 berries in 45 seconds. It's really cool. And then it's got like a clean output. You can just export like an Excel file. Sure.
Sorry. Have you correlated any of that back to what the Brix levels in those berries were? So what their firmness is by, think of something like sweetest batch for Driscoll's, how they hold up as opposed to where they are in the cycle, how sweet that is, how far along it is.
That's a great question. So the question was asking if we had correlated this data, essentially I'm going to say back to ripeness. And we do. So every berry that we run through this process, we also bag it and then take it back up to our lab in Fayetteville and have our lab run chemistry on it. So we only did one collection date this year, and I think that there were definitely some things that we got that like the firmness didn't make sense because the Brix were too low or the acidity was too high, and we know that it's not like that because we eat it in the field. And so, I mean, we have a lot of people that are collecting this fruit, so I'm going to do some extra training this coming season, and then we're going to add a second collection day too so that we can capture that. We also had rain the first week of June, which is like about when we were peaking. And that, I think, clouded it too, because you get watered down fruit, essentially. So, thanks for the question. This is Reese again, and he is going to be doing a chilling requirement project with us. So what we're looking for in this study is essentially to find a low chill marker in our program. With our fluctuations and how much chill we're getting every year, I think that this could be important, especially to integrate like low chill into something that also has secondary bud potential so that you have a recovery crop if it doesn't get to be too mild of a season. And then we also are doing like a big potted study with Reese where he has plants that he grew out in pots and he's put them into a cooler for synthetic chill. And then we also are taking cuttings out in the field that are naturally chilled and seeing how those relate back to each other and which model applies best as far as chilling for us in our program.
For how cold they can tolerate temperatures, or is it how many chill hours they require to wake up?
Okay, kind of neither, actually. So Karen was asking how we're using this data, whether we're like looking for quantifying chilling requirement, and that's actually not what we're doing. So we're doing this on a large scale. It's a GWAS, and we're taking cuttings from every selection in our program at 150 and 300 hours, and then measuring the percentage of bud break to estimate fulfillment of chill. And so we're looking specifically for things that are breaking bud early that are low chill. I mean, because that seems to be important. You know, I was in Georgia a few years ago, in South Georgia, and they got 150 hours of chill, and you could tell. I mean, it has a big effect on the crop. So, and like I said, if we can get that into something that has like good cane hardiness and secondary bud potential, I think that that is going to be important someday. Hopefully saves a farm someday. So also this season, you know, we've heard that there are issues with fusarium and that this is a need in the industry. So we have started working with Peter Henry at UC Davis and Jim Carell at the University of Arkansas. This year we surveyed about, 134 selections from our program, selections and cultivars. We have, you know, checks that have some known resistance. Navajo is said to have resistance, and Primark 45 is quite susceptible. So we use those as checks. We have some preliminary results that show that our program does have some degree of resistance. This data is a couple years out from being useful still. I just wanted to let you guys know that we heard you. We're working on it. We know it needs attention, and it is an important issue. A quick research station update. Our station director, Dr. Jackie Lee, is still killing it, still doing an excellent job. She's been working a lot on updating our infrastructure at our farm. So in 2024, that was like their 60th anniversary. And so we've been on that farm for a long time. We have some old equipment, we have some old buildings, we have had some really old greenhouses. And so we finally have gotten updated. At least part of our farm is updated. And our team is still ever growing down there. We did have record numbers of seeds generated this year on Blackberry. And so that's really exciting. That gives us more potential to look at in the field. Jackie Lee is going to be at NARBA. So she and Mike Brown, the gentleman here in the yellow shirt, are going to be representing the University of Arkansas in Hawaii. So if you're going, catch up with them, talk to them. They're nice people. All right, now let's do a little overview of our varieties that we've released from our program that do well in the Southeast. I listened to the talks yesterday, and I think if I took anything away from the talks yesterday, it's that I can't tell you what to plant on your farm. You have to plant some of everything and see what works well on your site. Even regionally, it's quite variable. So this is just a picture showing when our varieties ripen on floric canes. Starting from the left is the earliest, to right being the latest with Immaculate, our new baby. And then we're going to go into a little bit of details on all of these, and I'll show you pictures too. The pictures on the right are of 7-day stored fruit from our program. And that's going to be true for every slide, and it is the variety that is listed. So we'll start out with Natchez. This is our earliest floricane fruiter that we have right now. It's thornless. I would say it's semi-erect. It kind of has more of a trailing habit than a lot of our other stuff. It does have consistently large fruit. If you're in a local market, this is a good option. For shipping, it seems to be a little bit of a miss because it has some issues with reversion and softening. It does have the classic blackberry flavor. I'm going to try to bring the word tangy into this instead of tart, but it is tart. That's how I'm going to church up tart. So the Brix is usually 9.6, pH 3.22. So this data that I'm showing as far as Brix and our weights is our averages over like the years that we've been evaluating it. So this can be 10 years of data. For Immaculate, it's like 6. So good information is not going to match what's in a patent because it's changed over the years. You know, that's a 2-year average generally in a patent. But this is juice chemistry that I trust a lot. Natchez can overcrop if it's not pruned sufficiently. It has a lot of productivity, and it will just about fruit itself to death if you let it in certain environments, especially in the South. It has excellent plant health and good vigor. we see consistent cane production from it. It's been a nice variety. It's getting a little bit up there in age, and we're looking for something in the early season that is also large and exciting for somebody to use for a local market, but maybe something that has some sugar in it. Next, we're going to talk about Osage. So this comes in just after Natchez as far as ripening goes. It is thornless, it is more erect than Natchez for sure, and it is only a floricane fruiter. The fruit size is generally 5 to 6 grams, and it's one of ours that has pretty good flavor. It's consistent, it's sweet, low acid. That low acidity seems to be something that's really taking off in like customer preference. Brix over 11, pH close to 4, and so that's pretty mild. It has nice vigor and excellent plant health too. It's well adapted to the southeast, but it's less cold hardy than Washita Caddo and probably immaculate too. We think that immaculate's pretty high chill. Okay, Sweet Dark Ponca. I've got a couple of slides on some of the ones that I wanted to highlight a little bit extra, and I think, yeah, Ponca's maybe one of them. So this ripens the middle of the early season. It's a floricane fruiter, it's thornless, and it's extremely erect. These things have like chunky canes, and they're just super, super upright. If you're in a system where you're trying to bend stuff, I wouldn't put a Ponca in. They're kind of like little trees. It has small to medium-sized fruit, 6 to 7 grams generally. I heard Dalton say yesterday it has large fruit, and that's because he's never seen a primary fruit. You're getting secondary crop potential for sure. And so it does have those unique characteristics on the canes that it has delayed primocane height development, so the primocanes will stay pretty short until almost your entire crop is out of there, so you don't really overlap very much with tipping, and this is in Arkansas. I have seen Ponca varying heights in all over the United States, so I can only speak, I'm talking about what we see in Arkansas, that it stays, hip height until your fruit's out of there, and then you'll be back in there maybe 3 weeks later pruning as far as like doing soft tipping. It does have really nice plant health and vigor. It has what we're calling a stay green characteristic, where it just like keeps this really dark green, lush leaves on it until after fruiting is finished even. So you'll see it into the fall. We have noticed that it holds on to its leaves a little bit, and I'm a little concerned that that is contributing to lower hardiness. I don't have anything to base that off of. We like baseless theories in research, and that's my baseless theory, is that the plant doesn't really shut down because it's never forming an abscisic layer, so it's still sensing daylight and all that stuff. Carbs are still moving, so it doesn't harden off. So I would say its hardiness is with Osage, maybe even under Osage. The benefit, I guess, of Ponca over Osage is that it does have that secondary potential, so it'll form buds when the primaries get damaged and try to make up the difference. The fruit that comes off of the secondaries is generally larger. You'll see like 7 to 8 grams be more average than 6 to 7. All right, Traveler has been a good and exciting primocane fruiter out of our program. It's pretty early on the floricanes and kind of late on the primocanes. It's thornless, erect, again, small to medium fruit size, so 6.5 to 7.5 grams. Can have a nice flavor, pretty low acid. If you're working somewhere where you're not growing under a tunnel and it rains sometimes, I would be cautious with this because the acid is so low that when it rains, it can be like insipid, like taste exactly like nothing. So average Brix at our site is 10, and pH 3.5, close to 3.6. We've also noticed, and I've heard from a few of you, that it's a little bit low on yield. I don't know that it has a huge spot in the commercial place, but it is super firm. Primark 45 has been another important one. This is probably the most important one that we've had out of our program as far as like from a commercial perspective. It's middle in the early season, primocane fruiting, a little thorny and erect. The fruit size is pretty good, medium to large, I would say, 7 grams or more. It has the classic Blackberry flavor, so no aromatics or anything like that that I could detect. Brix 10.5, pH 3.4. And it does have great vigor, health, and productivity. I would say it also flowers late on the primocanes. So something to watch if you're in a place where you have set issues later in the season when it's quite hot. It is prone to reversion issues post-harvest too, so that can be limiting as far as shipping. Sweetheart Caddo. This is another favorite of ours out of the program that has a really good flavor. It's early to mid-season. The first year this is planted, it's going to look like it runs with Washita. The second year, it's going to look like it's with Ponca. So it kind of jumps around a little bit whenever it's getting established. It is thornless, erect. I think that it has quite nice vigor. Growers are liking it. We hear a lot of positive things about the size and the flavor. To me, it can have almost like a grape aromatic, like a Concord grape-like aromatic whenever it's dead ripe. It's really nice. It begins harvest between Natchez and Osage after the first year that it's planted. And it does have good post-harvest potential. I've heard some people criticize that it has large drupes, and you can see that in the picture, that it's got large drupes, so that's a concern from a shipping perspective, because those can be a little bit more tender and prone to like reversion issues. But we don't see much reversion on it in Arkansas. Primark Horizon is our newest of the primocane fruiters. It does have a couple of thorns on it. It's gonna run in a really similar season to the previous ones we've just talked about. It's a primocane fruiter. It's also quite erect, and it has really nice vigor too. The fruit on it is quite large and consistently large. And the set is nice throughout most of the season. Size can drop off a bit whenever we get into like middle of July. Brix usually 9.6, pH 3.67. And then it's another one of those that's a little bit prone to overcropping, like Natchez, that it's just ultra productive. And so you have to kind of watch how you manage it and prune it to make sure it doesn't crop itself to death. And so this picture is showing where Primark 45 is on the same day that Primark Horizon is. So Horizon has a little bit of early flowering on the primocanes. And like I said, I think that's important, especially for the Southeast. If you're gonna get a crop on a primocane, you need to have flowers going, I would say in what, May, June? May or June, something like that. Because the pollen viability seems to drop off, and then you have set issues later in the season. So if we can like get that early, where it's just hitting that right window, where you get a good price for your fruit and you get good set, that's what we're aiming for. It does have a longer primocane fruiting season and more berries per inflorescence also than 45. So in Arkansas, it usually runs from August until first frost. The reversion on it, I would say, is similar to Primark 45, but the firmness seems to be a little bit better. It does maintain well in storage up to 14 days. I think yesterday it was interesting hearing people talk about reversion and what's contributing to that. And so hopefully, I've seen 45 do well for somebody without having reversion issues. I hope that nutrient management might be a part of that, maybe. So Horizon also has fewer issues with set and fewer doubles. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like Primark Freedom or something like that, where it has those fruits that get kind of like fused together. This has fewer of those issues, and that seems to be a heat effect. So maybe, hopefully, there's a little bit of heat resistance coming into our program. Washita is our old classic workhorse. I'm going to just jet through this since we kind of know Washita. You guys have heard about it in a lot of other talks because I want to talk about Immaculate. So some highlights about Immaculate. It's thornless. It's floricane fruiting. It's a great addition to the late season options for growers. It has a nice erect upright growth habit. Commercial crop potential without a doubt. Unique plant behavior, which we'll talk about in a second, and it's really, really firm. So it's an attractive plant with good health. It tends to have shorter internodes like Ponca, but its overall stature will remain a little bit shorter. So it's gonna look like it doesn't fill the trellis quite as much as our other material, but it is incredibly productive. The yields are commercial with everything else. We wouldn't have released it if it wasn't. So it has really long inflorescences, which I think is perhaps a good and a bad thing. The fruit extends outside of the canopy. So if you have issues with sun scald, this might be a bad thing for you. If you have pickers going through a field and you want them to move quickly, it's probably a good thing for you. It has medium fruit size, 7 to 8 grams, classic flavor. And it begins harvest with Navajo and Vaughn. This year it was a little bit later than Vaughn. They sort of jump around too, a couple days before or after each other. This is a picture of Immaculate with full crop coming on. We've harvested this plot probably twice, and this is like peak season for it, I would say. This was on July 10th in Clarksville. So the yield, like I said, it is commercial yield, even though the plants are smaller. If you guys have feedback on this, I know it's just establishing in your fields if you got it last year, but I would love to hear what you have to say if you guys want to sit with me at lunch, or I think I'm going to run out of time, but catch up with me. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And so this is just to highlight that it doesn't fill the trellis quite as well. So it's gonna look a little bit odd. We don't have the freedom to play around with like manipulating fertilizer and stuff like that. You might be able to stretch it out with hitting it with a little bit more nitrogen. And so just showing that it's a little bit on the short side. Finally, thank you guys for coming. Thanks to everybody who made it. I think there was a whole ferry of people that came in like 10 minutes ago. So, yeah, if you guys have questions, catch up with me.
Ooh. Let's thank Carmen. Thank you. We actually have time for one question. If anybody has a question really quick. Yeah, we've got 2 minutes to spare. Does anyone have a question they want to ask right now? All right, Josh, let's hear it.
Any work done as a long cane with Immaculate?
No, we haven't done any work with long canes on it yet. We really don't do much with substrate at our program. I mean, we're like really breeding. Like, Dr. McWirt might eventually do something with long canes, perhaps. She does like the production type of stuff. So we try to get products out the door and then have help from other people getting us figured out how to make it viable.
All right, let's think.
Oh.
Go ahead, Wayne.
On the Immaculate,
Mm-hmm.
the harvest period, does it have an extended harvest period? I know us watching all this right, and you got really, you have a real high harvest, and then it's kind of over with. Like all of those rest are very extended. How's the Immaculate?
Immaculate is going to be, I would say, kind of middle as far as like how long of a season it has from our material. I see what you're saying about Washita being sort of like determinate that it all comes on at once. It's a little bit longer than Washita. It has like a small secondary potential, so it will shoot up like some basils and some internal secondary buds. It's not substantial though. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Aw, thank you.
So we're going to move on to our next presentation. We have Josh Mays with Triest Ag, and he's going to be talking about developing raspberries in the Southeast USA. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I think he's going to walk around a little bit, he said. So here you go, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm, for those that know me, I'm allergic to standing still, so I'm not going to. So yeah, for again, those that don't know me, I'm Josh Mays. I'm the Director of Agronomy with Triest Ag Group. I am far from a caneberry specialist, but I am curious and can convince people to try things. And so that's really what we're doing. We have far from figured this out, at least part of it, that we're going to talk about. But we have pretty good numbers and a pretty good understanding of producing this from a long cane standpoint, but kind of what's new and a new idea, we'll walk through it. So Triest Ag Group, just quickly, basically we're a soil solutions company, whether it's rooted in fumigation or fertilizer, equipment in a plastic culture system, irrigation, substrate, whatever the case may be, we want to bring value and opportunity to specialty crop growers in the U.S. That's our intent. I'll say thank you first. There are many in the room that were heavily involved with this. Cal Lewis, Walt Webb, Lewis Farms, Dalton, Lisa, Karen, Whitney, that have been instrumental in helping try to figure this out. So everybody who is heavily involved in this and has helped us along the way, you know who you are. We appreciate you. Also, all the growers in the room, we appreciate what you do, and we know what it takes. And how hard you have to work to make a living and put food on the table. So we appreciate you. So from my perspective, where raspberry stands as we started this is that traditional soil raspberry production in the Southeast is very difficult because we can't perennialize that crop through our summers. That's the hang up. So it's kind of stuck in our craw to develop the fourth berry. And so a lot has been done. The goal is to open up a berry market that's locally produced or sold alongside strawberry. That's a very good market for us. If we could get raspberries there, it's in a higher value retail situation, start small, very similar to the way strawberries did. And maybe over time, that's a commercial opportunity. Substrate production of long cane is viable, and it's proven. Lisa did a lot of work. NC State, us together with Cal and other places across the Southeast. We know this works. We'll talk about what that success has looked like, but it's high risk and it's expensive. Not trying to scare anybody. I'm just being honest. It can be management intensive and risky. Variety selection is going to be really critical. From the public side, we've been pretty limited on the long cane side of things to figure it out, but obviously plant material and varieties are really important. What I'll talk about, though, is the possibility of annualizing the crop with a tissue culture plant grown out in a greenhouse, then put out in a plastic culture production system, grown out 1 year, pick it, rip it out, reset. And in soil, which makes it cheaper and less risky. I put this picture up with Cal. This was it was a big goal to try and get all 4 berries kind of at a commercial setting at one time. Long cane raspberries made that possible and achieved that. But haven't we been here before of taking a perennialized crop that was struggling due to heat and pest pressures and figured out with plant material and plastic culture and fumigation to annualize it? The model within strawberries is there. It's just how do we potentially do it with ras? So the way we've gone, at least in the beginning, was a long cane system. So you're receiving this in like a 1.6 liter pot. So these are grown out in another growing area. We get those canes, cold store them, and pull them out in what's our winter months. So let's call it 3 weeks from now in late January. It's basically a 2 cane system. We'll pull it out into a high tunnel. Obviously the cost associated with this, and when we're picking in our early springs, protecting that crop from rain and having the ability to close this down, help them break bud, help frost protection, whatever the case may be, the tunnel structures are pretty critical to it. What this looks like in general is 9-foot centers in the tunnel, 1.5-foot plant spacing, so let's call it 3,200 plants per acre. You double that if you're talking about canes per acre. Receive those canes early January. We'll cold store them. Let's call it two weeks or so, maybe longer, depends on when you get them. And we'll pull them out in late January. Harvest window was from April 15th to June 10th. So the fruit has to come off when our temperatures are moderate, no different than strawberries. We need it in that window. This is kind of a look of a walkthrough of what that system looks like from canes to canopy to fruit. So if you go from soil to substrate, some of the key things and the reason why we're trying to figure it out in a soil system is the buffer you have associated here, the root mass you have, and the water retention in the soil that you're tied into versus this. If you think about all that fruit pressure, all those roots are in that pot. It is critical that you maintain fertility, salt levels, and moisture here, and that's what makes it risky. This is a much safer environment from a risk standpoint as long as pathogens are managed. This system is slow to change, whether it's pH or even nutrient levels, whereas this can be within hours. You can change the pH and dynamics in this. So it's just management heavy. These irrigation systems are also constant pressure, so the irrigation systems can get pretty elaborate, whereas here you may be running a couple of times a week. If heavy fruit load, you might even be running multiple runs a day, but this is a low frequency, high volume situation, whereas this is a high frequency, low volume, 14 to 20 run times at 2 to 3 minutes per. And everything's driven by the drainage in the system. So you want to shoot for 50% moisture in the pot at 15 to 20% drainage of what you put in. That's an ideal scenario. So that's kind of what the system looks like in general. NC State went down the road of really putting some pressure. This was Lisa's project and Gina Fernandez at Lewis Farms, was to really put pressure and grow this out and see what it actually looks like. And one of the first thought processes we had, this was around COVID. Cocoa core media was hard to get, it was expensive, and it was one of the first cost-saving measures that we felt like we could have. So we said if we can grow liners and greenhouse tomatoes and everything else in good old local pine bark, why wouldn't this work too? So we tried as hard as we could to match characteristics. Again, these are the cooperators and collaborators in that project. This is all Lisa's material I'm showing here. Basically, cocoa core was expensive, long lead times. We didn't like only having one source. Basically, if you couldn't get core, you didn't grow in substrate. That just wasn't good enough. And so like I said, we went down the road of finding an alternative. And the question was, could it do the job? Where the rubber met the road is, yes, it can. There are irrigation differences. There are system differences that you have to compensate for that we learned. But at the end of the day, the flats per acre production overall and the fruit quality and fruit size were essentially neck and neck. But the take home here is these are 5-pound flats, give or take. That's a pretty good yield of raspberries in the southeast U.S., right? This is viable, but it's expensive. I won't get into exact production costs, but they're pretty dramatic of what it costs to produce this. But it told us we could produce raspberries, right? We could do it. It is possible in the southeast to add this to your program, but we saw the cost and the risk of it. And we started getting curious. This is just those berry weight numbers, again, maybe slightly lower in pine bark, but overall viable. This is all what I just covered. But some of the unknowns and challenges of this are how do you handle major temperature swings? Think overcast, cloudy in the morning, turns into a bluebird sunshiny day. You can have massive temperature swings in these tunnels, and ras are very susceptible to that. So that's something that we have to figure out. Ideal pull out and planting dates. What we've seen is pulled out earlier doesn't necessarily mean earlier fruit, and we want that window as wide as we can get it. So those are some things we're working on. I know Lisa and Cal are working on spacings, 3 to 5 canes per meter, lateral pruning, all about how do we maximize the fruiting potential. So we're still working on this system for sure. But our issue is cost and management. This is a lot to bite off for a grower. So this is a funny name. Like all good things, this was born over drinks. Karen, Dalton, and Lisa and I I remember Dalton came in and he said, this long cane thing's cool and all, and it works. He said, but it's a lot of risk. He's like, what about this, right? And I had never really considered it and thought about it. We jokingly named it Rocket Raspberries while we were there, and thanks to Whitney for taking a 10 p.m. call with this crazy idea. But basically, if we took a tissue, this is really Dalton's kind of brainchild, and these pictures are at Dalton's farm. Dalton talked about this yesterday some, but the idea, this was close to us because as a company, this plasticulture system and making a new crop affordable for a grower in the southeast is what we're passionate about, and especially in the berry world. That's where we're rooted. And so it was, you take a high density, tighten your spacing up. So this is 7-foot centers. 2.5 foot plant spacings, trellis like tomatoes. The cost reduction of this production system is dramatic versus long cane, right? But it's just, could it work? Take a tissue culture plant, plug it in, grow it out through the summer, overwinter it. It would make a primocane crop. Whether that mattered to us or not wasn't really our focus, and then pick it in the spring. That was what we wanted to do. So this is kind of a look at that. Dalton may could speak to from planting to where this picture was taken, how long that was, but I'm just trying to show you the natural progression. So what you end up with is, let's call it a 4 or 5 foot tall cane that you overwinter. You just trellis it up, stick and string, and then this is your spring canopy or early summer canopy that you're going to pick on. So kind of a breakout for what this looked like with this variety. This is Crimson Treasure from Cornell. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Again, you're at 2,500 plants per acre. This was planted in early June, picked the following June in the mountains of North Carolina. So it's possible in the southeast, down in some of our other core blackberry production areas, if he can pick it there in June, is it possible that we could pick it Mother's Day in May? Could we get it in a strawberry window? And we still don't really know. We just branched this idea out last year. Already made a mistake that we've learned from. But you know, let's call it this 4,000 flats per acre is possible in this system. And if we could really do that on a larger scale, that's pretty attractive. But this is a significant reduction in production costs over long cane. Let's call it 30% of the cost. And so that's really why we're chasing this down, to see if we can figure it out. Starting with, like I said, at least we're starting with a tissue culture plant. That's really important because of scheduled planting. You need to be able to say, I want plants on June 5th or 10th or July 1st, whatever the case may be. And then grow those out to, let's call it plug plants or tray plants in a greenhouse. So a very consistent plant material is going to be really important. And again, you're 20 to 25% of the cost of what the long cane plant is, cooled, grown somewhere else, shipped here, potted up, on and on. It's just a significant reduction in cost. You need a variety that's upright. Out of tissue culture, the more sturdy it is and the growth habit is straight up, is less time we have to trellis, the hardier they are. That's going to be important. Crimson Treasure, again, from Cornell, has been successful. It's what we've used so far. And this planting date target and the best production practices are, we don't know. I mean, literally, I think Dalton's got it more dialed in where he is, but in the southeast, we have to plant at a time where we can get enough cane growth and keep that plant surviving and healthy and doing well. Also be able to have the right conditions to set those floral buds for next year. You know, we planted around from the late August to early September, some of the folks in this room this year, and what we found was plants were really healthy. They grew off well. We got to about 36 inches worth of canopy. They looked great, and when the days got short, they just stopped. And so we know now we're probably going to have to pull those out earlier, which July and August in the southeast can be a tough time. We don't know exactly if that's going to work, but the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here is pretty attractive if we can make that go. I stole some slides from Dalton. You know, he presented this earlier in the week. This is kind of his breakout or his progression with raspberries, if you will. But this high density trial, and we looked at a fumigated annual system, again, similar to strawberries, peppers, tomatoes. We have done this. We know how to grow specialty crops in the same spots and control pests, which we would have to bring to this. But unfortunately, the hurricane that was suffered in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, obviously it's been talked about a lot. We lost this trial. Not much quit in Dalton, so I think we've already talked about coming back in and continuing to look at this. I will say the day, well, I was here near this time period when they were picking. That day it was 90, what was it, 94, 95 when I was there, and I was pretty impressed with what the fruit size and what the handling capability of this fruit was. I would have thought it wouldn't have handled that well. So we're pretty interested in how this variety is going to do, and what I saw there made me think we could make it work in more so in the Southeast. And maybe not just raspberries, right? I think that on the blackberry side of things, it's a traditional perennial crop, but fusarium wilt is making that more and more and more challenging, right? And it's limiting variety selections. And so even I think it should be looked at, what does this kind of annual system look like amongst blackberries in cost comparisons to traditional perennialized blackberry production? It's worth looking at, right? It gives you a lot of variety options. It gives you a lot of options on how many blackberries you plant or don't plant if you were in an annual system. I'm not advocating for this. I'm simply saying I think that it should be looked at, because I think in combination with fumigant programs 1 year in, 1 year out, maybe we could start to manage some of this fusarium issue. But it's all about ROI and how much production versus how much money and hassle. But I do think it is an option. So in summary, I think raspberry production is possible in the Southeast. These are 2 farming operations that have proved it. But there is a whole lot to learn. And basically we're in the mode of have an idea, put it in the ground, screw it up, learn from it. Next step is kind of where we are. Long cane production is proven, but again, it's high risk and it's management intensive, but it's a system that absolutely works if you have good plant material and those connections. We're evaluating this annual production deal. We're making mistakes and learning. We've already planted them too late, but basically what we're going to do, what we will see from those trials this year though, is when is the bloom timing and the fruit timing, when does that fruit come off, and how viable is it to continue to chase this. And then we'll probably just mow those down, grow them back through this summer, and keep on learning. Plant material, variety, and timing will be critical, as I just said. We're trying to walk through and answer some of those questions now. But there's an opportunity, right, to open up a new cash crop for the Southeast. I saw what roadside market strawberries turned into commercial opportunity strawberries, and now have helped tobacco growers, sweet potato growers diversify in our areas. And I've seen the impact that it's had on agriculture, and so that's what we're chasing. Right? Can we add raspberries to that? And Southerners do eat them. We've figured that out. I think we'd like to get this going. So thank you for your time. This is my information for anybody who may want to get up with us or talk to us. We're here at the trade show, our booth. We got a lot of irons in this fire. So if we can help you in any way, or you got any interest in looking at something like this with us, let us know. I'll also say we appreciate y'all. We've got a band tonight and kind of a thank you thing at the warehouse. So stop by. You can stop by our booth and pick up an invitation to that. We can continue to talk about this. And thank y'all for your time. I appreciate it.
We have time for questions if anyone has a question.
Cal doesn't get to ask
Cal has a question.
You probably told me this, but refresh my memory on why you chose the crimson. Why you chose the crimson, crimson sweet from Cornell, and why aren't you trying other varieties in that program with Dalton?
Well, I'll throw that one back at you, Cal. I said, hey, Cal, how many varieties would you be willing to plant and look at this with me? But mainly because Dalton had it in the ground, and we went peak summer, hot, conditions that I know we would likely get when that fruit's going to come off, and we saw it hold up well, and it yielded in this system. It's an earlier variety for them, as far as I know from Courtney. We talked to Courtney Weber about this. It's kind of his recommendation. Dalton had ground truthed it in Hendersonville, and Whitney had experience with it, tissue culture, plant availability, so it just worked out. But I think now, one thing we did, the trial at Dalton, we had Crimson Treasure, Crimson Giant, which is a larger berry version of that, and then we had Ponca, Caddo, Wachita. And Vaughn, we were going to look at this in a variety trial, half fumigated, half not, at his place, and Helene had other ideas for that. But I think absolutely any public variety or any variety really, I think is worth looking at it if it can maintain fruit size and temperature, then I think we should look at it. The lead times and stuff on TC is, Whitney's already telling me I got to know now, right? But so that's the other difficulty. It's always a process, as you well know. But we're curious about anything that's got a chance, for sure.
Okay, thanks. We got another question.
What is the average price for a long cane plant?
Call it $6.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Thank
is right.
Thank you.
I don't know what that is today. Cal might could speak to that better than I can. But at the time of our trial, you were sitting at $6, and from this TC plant grown out, we're still working it out. But you're call it $2, right? You're talking about a third. So the risk associated, and even the equipment needs, the irrigation systems, automation, we're in that business and passionate about it, but it's we've got to make it profitable too. And a soil system, if a strawberry grower, we're going to adopt it, that plasticulture system, drip, fertility management, very confident, right, in that it's an easier transition. I think long cane has a place, absolutely. It's just a lot to bite off the first time you go to do something like this.
Yeah, kind of on the back of that, what's the difference in just plant material costs between a traditional raspberry perennial system and then the high density fields versus long cane?
I really, well, for us, the traditional perennial system doesn't exist, and I don't have a lot of experience. Anybody in the room that wants to take that on what that would be in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, I really don't know what their standard spacings are versus Dalton. What would your spacing be if you weren't high density traditional trellising on a perennialized raspberry? Yeah.
It should be 3 feet.
We planted them based off the Blackberries, because that's the equipment we had. But once we saw what the plants looked like in the ground, I was like, that's way too far apart. So that's when we started shrinking them down. But like their traditional varieties, like Carolina and Heritage, probably 10 feet would be the closest on them. Because they're real big, weaky plants. And these Crimson Treasures, they're nice and compact and stay short, so you can pack them in.
Yeah, so if you figure 10 by 3 to 7 by 2.5, what's that, 30% or something increase? So yeah, we're just trying to maximize them in there. And if this would work, whether it was blackberries or raspberries, utilization of tunnel infrastructure, tunnels are not cheap. And so if the opportunity to go from, let's say, 9 to 7 and potentially squeeze another row in there, we haven't ground truthed that, but I mean, raising tunnel utilization would have an economic impact too. So,
So if you did the system kind of more towards the coastal area, like I guess on Cal's farm, you would do it under tunnels?
Yeah, we would. I mean, it's hard to tie up tunnel real estate when you're not sure. I'm not speaking for Cal, just saying but I think once we knew it was viable, certainly I would think it's under tunnels eventually. It's just going to be too valuable, and those rains, same reason we're under tunnels on blacks, you would need to protect that fruit for sure. But I think we can ground truth at open field right now, and then add the element of season extension, closing them down, bringing them in early. All that comes downstream of just does it work, period.
That would still be on a planting on a yearly basis?
Yes. Yeah, I don't, obviously we would try, pick them, cut them down, let them come back through. How well is that going to work, and how many years could we run that? We're not there yet, but Hurricane Helene slowed us down a little bit, but we'll get there.
So we've got time for another question.
So, Josh, what do you think the geographic range of rocket raspberries potentially is?
All of it.
Because when we look at the long cane system, we were looking at the benefit of raising that nursery material in a cooler climate where we had better conditions for floral bud induction in the fall, and then, of course, that growing degree day accumulation in the spring to push our harvest window earlier in the season to kind of avoid the worst of the heat. So do you think rocket raspberries can do all of it, or are we still looking at parts of the southeast where the value of that cooler nursery climate on the long canes makes that system more viable?
Well, look, we got caneberry growers in the room in North Florida. We got some in Georgia. So I think anywhere, the more variety options we have, it's just if it can tolerate those temperatures. We saw some Crimson Treasure data from Florida, right? It's all primocane. It never overwinters, and so I think that there are a lot of options. I would think, hopefully, we could figure out how to do it anywhere. That has temperate enough climate that they'll go through reproduction and fruit. I would hope we could do it anywhere.
Thank you.
So what would be your new cultivar trait priorities for either primocane, rocket raspberry production, or long cane, floricane raspberries?
Compact, high density. We like take tulamine, for example, big, leggy, everywhere. That's not good. Tight, compact, upright, so we could trellis later, save on labor. Right. Obviously, large fruit that would tolerate heat. The heat tolerance and the shelf life component of it, I think, is the most critical thing. And to Cal's question, what was attractive about Crimson Treasure? I got a video. I should have played it, but it was 94 degrees when he was picking them. We were picking them in the middle of the day, and I'm putting them in my hand, slapping them, squeezing them as hard as I can. They're not going to mush. Dalton's saying he's keeping them in the cooler 10 days to 2 weeks at that time. That might be a little overkill, but still, if you can handle it in high temperatures, that is what you're looking for, and maintain fruit size.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you, Josh.
Thank y'all. We appreciate it. Oh, thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, I think this is a good segue for our next presentation. It's actually a panel, so we're going to talk more about varieties. So if you have more questions about raspberry varieties or blackberry varieties, this will be a good segue to have that discussion. So our next talk is going to include Matt Wilson from Arkansas, and we have Dalton Rhodes from my neck of the woods in the mountains of North Carolina, and they're going to share some insights and key attributes that make blackberry and raspberries profitable in the Southeast. I have a couple of questions I'll probably ask both of you to share with the audience, and then we'll just kind of open it up for whatever questions you guys may have. Does that sound good? Do you want to use this or go up here? Yeah, go up there. Come on, Dalton. Come on, Matt.
You're up first, man. I talked yesterday.
I am.
All right, we want to welcome Matt and Dalton. So first, I'm going to ask you guys just tell us a little bit about the varieties that you grow on your farm, and then talk about your operation.
Thank you, Karen. As Karen said, I am Matt Wilson. I'm a blackberry grower, commercial packer and shipper in north central Arkansas. We have 144 acres of blackberries with 9 varieties. I did have 2 more, so I was a crazy guy. I had 11 varieties at one time, and as Carmen said this morning, it's interesting to hear how different all these varieties perform in different locations. In meetings like this, Dalton said yesterday Traveler was great, and I thought, what? Traveler tasted terrible on my farm. What's he talking about? So we hope to share a little more about that this morning. Like I say, we've got Natchez and Ponca that their peak week for us is week 24. Osage and Caddo seem to peak around week 25. I've got a little bit of Apache. Y'all probably all remember that one from years ago with white druplet problems. It's the first time we started seeing that 15, 20 years ago. I wanted to put it on RCA and see if I could get away from white druplet, and I could not. Ouachita, Galaxy, Vaughn, and Navajo. I did have Twilight. Cal, you're familiar with the Fusarium word. You were I think you and I get to carry the titles for discovering Fusarium in our states, and Twilight was where it first appeared on my farm. Good productive variety, but I took it out after this year hoping to contain Fusarium to that one field. You want to do some intro?
Dalton Rhodes with Rhodes Berry Farm. We're in the mountains of North Carolina, and we grow floricane and primocane blackberries, and we do raspberries too. We've got Navajo, Ouachita, Osage, Vaughn, Ponca, Traveler, and then on the raspberries, we've tried pretty much everything. But a lot of that was in that presentation from yesterday.
So Matt and Dawn, can you talk a little bit about your markets for your operation? Are you all wholesale, Matt? Okay. And then if you saw Dalton's Grower Spotlight yesterday, you saw that he's pretty diversified in his markets, everywhere from wholesale to the local grocery store, Ingles in our area, and then he also does direct market to consumers through.
It's not you pick.
Not UPIC, though. He doesn't want people to come to the farm, but he wants to send it to the market. So pretty diversified market there. Is there a variety that is kind of the workhorse of your farms? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So we have a lot of problem with spring freeze, so none of the early season varieties can really be a workhorse for us. Navajo's kind of what we're stuck with, and it's always productive, but it can have some quality issues, and we got to find something to replace that. Immaculate might be what that is, or if we can get a Traveler to yield better and fruit earlier, or some other kind of primocane, that would be the workhorse for us.
I want to speak a little on the marketing question. As a commercial shipper and packer, I heard what Dalton said yesterday about finding some local markets and splitting his crop, and he's got it down to the different percentages that he goes in all the different directions. And I think that's something we've got to really focus on as growers as these labor rates continue to increase. We've got to really find some niche markets to get the most dollar for our cases. I've been down the road of using 3 marketers in 1 year and trying to figure out how to divide the crop up between 3 different marketer outlets. Then we've gone the exclusive route and only using 1 marketer. Learned some lessons there too. I think you need to stick to diversity. You can bounce one off the other and see what's going on in the marketplace a little better than you can with just one. Workhorse varieties, Natchez is real productive for us. I know South Georgia had problems with overfruiting and it actually killing itself. We've been lucky that's not happened on our farm, and I would say Ouachita is a real reliable, productive variety as well. But it's been around a while, and we're starting to see quality issues, and I don't know if we fertilized wrong in 24 or the weather affected us. Ouachita I've always said I could depend on Ouachita, and then 2024 made a liar out of me, but it's still a good variety.
Okay, the next question I have for you guys is just sort of what are you looking for in a variety for it to be successful for your operation? I know we're always trying to figure out the best marketing timing, so we're always like, oh, we need a late variety, and then the next year we'll tell Carmen, actually, we want it to be really early, and or late. You're always flipping back and forth, but like, what are some of the things that you're looking for a variety to be successful?
So for us, it would need to be a late blooming variety, and it needs to be big fruit that the pickers can pick fast, because that's where you lose the most of your money, is when your pickers are out there and you have to pay them by the hour. So we want something that hits hard, goes for 3 to 4 weeks, and then stops, where you don't have to spend extra time and money trying to get that last part of the crop or the first part.
Yeah, I mean, so ones that kind of take a little while to ramp up, you have a lot of labor invested in just a low yield pick, and then when they really peak, it's worth the cost, right? And so you would rather that peak be shrunk a little bit. Yeah, that makes sense. Not sure if biologically you make that happen, but Matt, what about you?
Repeat the question for me, because my mind went to my soapbox about H2A labor.
Okay. Let's not go there yet. Maybe save that for the end, and we'll depress everybody.
Okay.
But for now, we're just talking about what would make a variety successful for your farm. What are you looking for in a variety?
Productivity, obviously, pickability for the workers being able to pick the most volume right here in one space. Fill boxes quickly. Shippability, obviously, for us would be a big one. It needs to go in a clamshell and ship and not turn into a leaker. Timing, it can be important. As you said, we've all, as an industry, kind of been pushing for later varieties. I'm afraid we're all going to end up with later varieties, and then that won't be the place to be in the market. So we got to be careful that we don't all plant thousands of acres of the latest variety, immaculate, and then all wish we were back in Natchez and Ponca. So a good spread, I think.
So have special labeled varieties been a topic with your marketers at all? Something like a Swedish batch, is that happening right now for any of the public varieties?
In my circles, I've heard discussions about it. My concern, originally we said, well, would you label it by variety? Why don't we label it by variety? On the farm level, you're going to create a nightmare for me trying to keep all that organized and pack the right fruit into the right clamshell, and do the workers get the right packaging? I like what I'm hearing, that there's been a shift toward only certain varieties qualify for the Swedish batch label. That would help streamline and make it a little easier, I think. Dalton, you've been doing a little more on niche labeling. I'll let you.
So we're also a marketer, so we have to compete against that too, and it makes it hard. Like, they definitely have a competitive advantage whenever you have a consistent flavored thing, like you can demand floor space with it. But I don't think that breeding so much would do that as much as like just on-farm tests, because say our Navajos taste awful, but down on the coast, they're one of their best tasting ones. And our Travelers taste great, but theirs taste horrible. So I think it'd be real hard to do that by variety. I'm not sure exactly what the best way would be to do that.
But to your point right there, Navajo's great on my farm and not great on your farm. Mm-hmm. So our varieties wouldn't even qualify as Swedish label.
Yep.
So when you're determining a variety that works, how do you do that? Are you collecting data? Do you plant a bunch of varieties and then say, oh, that one lived, that one's pretty productive? Like, how do you go about kind of honing in on the one that you're excited about that you're going to plant more of?
We basically go off of the pickers. So if a picker loves something, then that means you're going to have a tenth the headaches you would on a variety that's a pain in the butt to pick. And that means you make more money because, whenever pickers are happy, you don't have problems. That and market timing and overall yield.
I would totally agree. I say we have data overload at my farm. We've got too many accountants running around with clickers and Excel spreadsheets. But for them, it's about the numbers, and a variety that is boasting the most numbers, and the pickers picking the most pieces per hour and making a lot of money is what we're looking at for a variety.
So I have a question, I guess, about Immaculate. Have you guys tested it or looked at it for orange rust susceptibility? Because as Dalton said, Navajo is kind of the late workhorse for a lot of these farms, and to have a replacement, it would need to be in that same window. Have you? Does anybody, I'm going to open it up, unless you guys have any ending comments on sort of like varieties you're excited about that are coming down the line, or like things that you're looking at. If you want to share your secrets, basically.
I'll add your Immaculate. We just got planted in the ground in April, so we haven't had it long enough to know if it's orange rust susceptible or to see fruit on it, but we do have it in the ground to look at this spring.
Were you happy with the trellis fill on it?
The question was, are you happy with how it filled in the trellis for Immaculate? Go ahead.
You're making me photograph, go back through my files here. No, it's been a little bit of a straggler like Ponca on trellis fill so far.
Do you think that could be fixed with like tightening up spacing, or are you talking about the height?
Height, yeah, it's struggling on height.
Yeah, I think it always will.
Yeah. Wasn't it Immaculate I emailed you and Margaret about that was giving me Ponca PTSD on? Yeah, okay. Thought so.
So we also just planted Immaculate in the mountains of North Carolina, so we'll have more information for you next year, and then Galaxy and Twilight as well. But I do know some growers here that are growing those that might have more insight. Any comments on like things you're excited about coming up? Or
the highly branched one that you were talking about, Carmen, how soon till that one comes out?
I mean, we're probably like 5 years out from having that on the public market. Yeah, this was the first year that we got to see it, so we like to take at least 3 years of yield data on it before we'll say like we trust this information before we release it. And that's assuming that one is going to hold on. You know?
I'd say that's probably the one I'm most excited about, because then we can get away from floricanes and advance that crop.
For your farm, that makes perfect sense, because you would have so much bud injury, you would just avoid that. You could do primary you can keep the grounds alive.
Yep.
Be early blooming, so it should miss like having set issues because of
so kind of piggybacking off of that, so Dalton's interested in the one that just branches on its own without any manipulation or tipping. What about, you guys are really selecting a lot of primocane blackberries, it looks like, in the program. Are there any of those that are pretty early that could fit into this long cane alternative system that Josh just talked about?
Potentially. So I think with the branchiness, I wonder if that would conflict with that thought of like wanting something that's like really erect and upright, you know, because the branchy ones tend to be like, they take up quite a bit more space. Almost all of the ones that we've selected and are looking at is like, we have maybe a list of 6 that we think are gonna, 1 to 2 of them are gonna be varieties, we think. And all of them run early. Like that's what we are looking for right now. The next thing that we release, if it's not another late blackberry for floricane season, it's gonna be an early primocane fruiter that goes to flower quick. The canes come up early. That's what we're interested in.
Okay, I have one more question, then I promise I'm going to open it up. So I know you guys have seen some articles and heard news on Pairwise coming up with a seedless blackberry. As growers, how excited about that are you? Would you be willing to pay for that patent? I'm just curious. Thoughts on this?
I think it's $20 million buy-in right now.
Is that all?
We don't have
That's
that.
it. You got it, Dalton. 20 million.
I don't have that.
That's a joke. I don't know how much.
But yeah, in the future, like if you could design stuff for your farm, because our environment's totally different than Matt's, totally different than Wayne and Brent, Cal. You'd have to tailor fit it for where your operation is and tell them, I want this, this, and this, instead of us all trying to plant all these varieties at the same place, see what works, and then how you have to manage it there. So it cut down a lot of learning time.
So you definitely avoided the seedless blackberry question. Is that something you would be interested in growing?
I forgot about the seedless one. I don't. It depends on the consumer.
Right,
If
it's
there's a
all
demand
consumer
for it,
driven.
yeah. If there's not, then no.
Okay, good answer. What about you, Matt?
I agree. It would be nice to not have a seed stuck in my tooth every time I'm taste testing the berries, but not for 20 million.
Yeah, yeah.
That does not pencil.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
So what I've heard, I don't work for Pairwise, I work for the University of Arkansas, but my understanding is that it still has like a seed trace and that the seed coat is thinner, so it's actually like less detectable, not necessarily, it's not that you would like bite into it and never find a seed.
The seed embryos are still viable.
Are they? Do you work?
We talked with them earlier in the year. The seed embryos are still viable. They basically just eliminated the seed coat, which let you detect when you're actually biting down on a seed.
Did that have any effect on the architecture of the plant?
They don't know, because I don't think they're looking at it from for us, like a breeding perspective, like if we were trying to save seed to propagate for crosses, but I think for you're just buying new culture plants anyways, I don't think they'll be much of an issue. Although that makes me wonder if you have to take different effects into account when you're looking at things like firmness versus.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely gonna. So what he's talking about up here is talking about how this might impact like post-harvest quality and the firmness of the fruit. You know, seeds give fruit structure, and so it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out as far as shipping viability.
Post-harvest, because now we have large sweet berries like lawn, but if you take away some of the structure from it, it just turns wood.
Sure, yeah.
Exciting stuff for the future. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? All right, great. I'm gonna get some steps in. I'm gonna bring this over so everybody can hear your question.
It depends on the question.
Are you guys seeing any difference in price of per acre based upon variety? If you're trying to go out and make acquisition, like are there some varieties that are kind of more valuable than others?
My answer would be yes, just based on its productivity. Some varieties perform better on our farm than others that, based on its volume of production, it will be more expensive or less expensive for us.
So was that like buying a already established blackberry planting, or to put it in the ground?
Already established.
Already established, Dalton.
I really haven't had any experience with that, but I'd say that's more involved with like what the infrastructure is and what the plant density and all that is. But we're just stuck on our same little farm. We haven't bought anything.
So, that probably didn't really answer the question unless you talk to them a little bit more about which ones are more productive, perhaps, like which varieties are more productive, and then you could put a price tag on that. Any other questions? Varieties, comments, discussion? No? Oh, awesome.
Of the different varieties that you have, what do you consider the most shippable?
So for us, it would probably be Ouachita and Traveler. Navajo can be a really good shipper until you get into the time of the window they peak at, which is when hurricanes like to come through where we are. So if you have a good weather year, Navajo, I'd throw up there too.
I would agree. I would say definitely Ouachita. Most years Navajo. Vaughn and Galaxy both are pretty good shippers as well. The best being Ouachita and Navajo.
Yes, please.
Follow-up question there. What is your worst? Like, is there one that you're, with the markets that you serve, that you're like, you know what, I need to stick to a local market with this one because it's just not going to make it there?
Not for me.
So for us, that would probably be Vaughn anytime that rains in the forecast, and Ponca just because we have a weird ripening problem and everything on our Ponkas where some of the druplets ripen faster and some ripen slower. So anytime you get a ripe blackberry, it's already got some overripe parts on it, so it's real hard to sort through that and ship commercially.
Ponca also has been kind of leaky in our post-harvest evaluation, so I think that probably contributes a little bit to having potential issues.
So Ponca's really sweet, has a really high Brix, and it was interesting with your firmness machine, that correlation question Josh had for you with Brix and the correlation with firmness. It'd be interesting to see that with Ponca because it is really sweet. And maybe there's something going on with the firmness there as well. Any other questions? Okay, I'll make it back to you, Penny.
So my question is, besides harvest, what are the biggest cost investments in your operation, and where are you looking for more cost savings or to cut, expenses?
So for us, it was our full-time employees that train the crop year-round, but we've gotten away from that and we're going to more of a mechanical pruning type thing, and that's the whole point of like those rocket raspberries there. We want to be able to do all the pruning from a tractor with a bush hog and like do mow down timing on it, and that would probably cut our cost by 1/3 per acre if we can get away from off-season labor.
Labor, as Dalton said. Labor is our number one expense. It gets more expensive every year, and not outside of harvest labor. As he said, the training or tying, pruning, whatever words you like to use for getting your vines trained to the trellis. If you're doing RCA and laying down and standing up, you're just adding more cost. Probably getting away from that in the future. As Dalton said, we've got to be more mechanical in everything that we do, and looks like he's already a step or two ahead of me on his tomato and string and bush hog. That looks like it's going to save a lot of money. And we need reform in H2A labor weight rates, big time.
All right, you have a question?
So, yeah, you kind of sprung another question, too. It's quite diverse from the first one. So, going back on the mechanical side, would you guys, are you guys more than happy to jump into mechanical harvesting if something can be developed, or would it mean changing everything you do?
Absolutely. Depending on what was developed and how much you would have to change your system would be my question, is what costs are there. But my big question on mechanically harvesting a blackberry is, okay, we remove it from the plant, now what? Was it falling and hitting something, and how is it going to survive that landing is what I can't imagine in my mind.
Yeah, if it's like blueberry, it's all about impacts.
Right.
Yeah, number of impacts and how hard the impacts are. And goes right back to you, Carmen, back to Margaret. Now you have to have a super, super firm blackberry, right, to hold up. And maybe something with smaller drupes, too, so you don't have so much.
Blackberry that will bounce.
Right. Yeah, there is that type. Yeah. But on top of that, my other diverse question on this, I was curious about how Galaxy tastes, because I've noticed that, we talk a lot about subacid, but there are cases where a high acid tastes just fine. And I've known the Oregon material in the past has tended to have high acid, and I was curious as to what you've noticed with Galaxy.
I would agree with you. It's a little tart to me, but it's not as tart as Natchez can be. So the flavor's good on Galaxy.
As far as the mechanical harvesting goes, I went to the Pacific Northwest a couple years ago. As far as the mechanical harvesting goes, I went to the Pacific Northwest last year and saw raspberry production happening, and a lot of the stuff up there is diverted towards processing. So they do mechanical harvest pretty much everything in the Pacific Northwest unless it's going to fresh market. The growing system has to be quite different. I think the breeding program for us would have to be different because you're looking for different cane attributes. You have to make sure that you plant in a way that they can get beat up pretty badly, because I mean, it's essentially like, rubber flippers that are like knocking the fruit off. So it's not even that it would be like grabbing it and dropping it, unless they've made progress on that robotic arm thing. AI is coming on the scene, and it's probably going to happen pretty fast, so maybe there will be a solution for that in a few years. It's not destructive to the canes.
Appreciate you, Dalton and Matt. So our next presenter is Dr. Penny Perkins-Vesey. She's with NC State University. She's a post-harvest physiologist, and she's going to talk about post-harvest quality and handling and kind of looking back at developments for shipping blackberries in the Southeast. So we're really excited to have you, and thank you so much, Dr. Perkins.
Thank you so much for having me. I see we have a light crowd here right now, so hopefully I can get your interest going. So I've been doing this work. It started long ago when I first got out of grad school, so I've got a lot of years invested here. So I wanted to kind of, a lot of people in this room are way too young to remember what it was like before 1980. But blackberries were pretty much something you got out of your garden, or maybe you go, I've heard a number of stories about picking them wild. They could be anywhere from pretty nice to very small and bitter, and always soft. And if you were lucky, you might have a local store that would get some locally grown blackberries. They'd hold for about 2 days. I kind of equate that to what raspberries used to be like, where you could watch the mold develop over a day. And then the other problem is, of course, that they were all thorny for 95%, unless you were lucky for the one Hillquest. But depending on where you lived, like where I was in Maine, it was a bear-filled experience to pick them. And then, of course, if you're in the South, you always worry about chiggers. So definitely the time was great for starting commercial markets. And this was Jim Moore who came up with this back in 1964 and started improving blackberries, specifically for erectness, then getting them earlier, thornless, and getting the fruit quality up. And then John Clark, of course, came along and he worked a long time with Jim, and then eventually took over the program. So I met them back in the early 90s. We were on a field trip for another meeting. And John said something about in post-harvest quality in blackberries, because I was assigned to, my job was to improve or come up with crops that would grow in the southeast plains of Oklahoma. And then we started talking, and after a few discussions, decided to start looking at post-harvest. And the reason for this was serendipity for a good part of it, because I was located for the USDA ARS, which I said has a mandate that differs from a state. The state says you grow crops for the state. The feds are like, well, you need to be nationally known, so you can go anywhere you want to. And it turns out that Lane and Clarksville are only about 4 hours apart. So an easy, well, not so easy anymore, but a day trip basically to drive out there, collect fruit, and bring it back. So sometimes just little things like logistics make all the difference. So one of the things looking back and looking over this is, how do you start growing a new crop? And I look at this now because at the time it was just, this is what I'm doing. But now when I look and see what new crops are coming along, like elderberry, for instance, and what the barriers are for elderberry, I realize how important what Jim Moore did early on with blackberries. Because the very first thing you have to do is make sure that you have the genetics for that crop to go upward. And in his case, making it bigger and making it firmer. And then the next question is, how do you make protocols to make sure it stays good? And then prove to the vendors that these varieties are going to hold. And that's a hard sell, because they cannot believe that your blackberries are going to hold for a week in their store. And then also, once you get that first bar, the next thing is cold chain management. One of the things I ran into was there were some growers in the Dallas area that said, oh yeah, we just go out and harvest and immediately put it on a train. And I'm just going, what? It's 85 degrees out here and you have all this heat buildup. But at the time, they didn't have any kind of pressure to go to cold chain management, because there was an endless demand for blackberries in the 1990s, before Mexico came in. And then the next things that happen as you grow and grow and grow your system is you start to anticipate the events that can shorten shelf life, which many times can be environmental. And then, of course, the big one, as we've seen with blackberry, we've met the demand the initial demand of consumers. And now we had to figure out how to grab in more consumers and get repeat purchasing in order to keep that growing, the whole system growing for BlackBerry. So of course, no surprise to anybody here, the major problems with Southeast and growing blackberries, and also in the southern plains, is always about the heat, and not just heat, but humid heat, not unlike California, which tends to be more dry heat. So you have more respiration, you warm the fruit up, you make it more prone to bruising, and then it also slows down your labor efficiency. And then you have the humidity and rain issues. Botrytis or gray mold will set in very early when it's during bloom, and all you have to do is miss one fungicide spray because you had rain, and the spores are waiting and ready to start growing once you have a ripe fruit. And that, of course, also needs to, the next thing is it's extremely hard to escape in the Southeast, that need for heat removal, plus cold storage, plus cold refrigerated transport. And then also transportation with trucks and container ships. If you're lucky enough to start shipping off coast, you have even more logistics to learn and manage. So what the steps that we took along the way, it's kind of interesting looking back and saying, okay, what were the things we had to do? Well, the first thing was we had to have the right material, and that was very fortunate for us, thanks to the University of Arkansas. And then we had to come up with a repeatable system. It had to be quick, it had to be reproducible, and it had to be directly related to the crop and what the problems were. And then we had a number of side issues that emerged over time. What's the correct maturity for a blackberry? Can you pick it half red and have it ripen correctly? What's going to happen to the eating quality? What type of packaging materials should we be using? How do we do field heat removal? What's the best way to handle that? What's the correct storage temperature? And how can we even prolong that? Can we go from stored material and hold it a little bit longer by playing with modified atmosphere or something else, some other system to increase shelf life? And then you have the hiccups, which I'll talk about a little bit, the major one that we're all aware of with red druplet. And then also the big change, where I'm at now in my position now, is moving more from the appearance, but also to looking at the health part of blackberries. Okay, so again, we happened to have, at the time, Navajo was just coming out as a numbered line. So we had this thornless variety that just was amazing looking, and turned out to be an amazing, I mean, you guys laugh now, but at the time was an amazing fruit. We held this thing for 28 days and couldn't believe it. And then later, when we were comparing against Shawnee, which Shawnee was a decent-sized fruit and had pretty decent shelf life, but nowhere near what Navajo was like. And it was very consistently firm. Now, then we had to figure out the next step, that first part of those steps for determining how you do this. How frequently do you pick it? And what's the maturity? And what do we define as pre-harvest issues, like rain? And what do we define as post-harvest issues? And then, of course, the evaluation system. So the first thing we figured out real fast is that it's not as bad as a raspberry. In my opinion, a raspberry, as soon as you get to the end of the row, you might as well turn around and start picking it again. But for blackberry, it's basically 2 to 3 days if you have basically 8 hours over 70 degrees. It's that quick, of course. Otherwise, you have too many soft fruit. And then the other pre-environmental conditions, many times you walk through the field with John saying, what's that white droop on Natchez? Like, don't worry about that. But it turns out, sunburn turned out to be an issue. And now I think we know more about what the things are that lead up to sunburn and how to prevent it. I noticed one year I was taking measurements of our rows are running east-west at the farm, and I was measuring the temperature and at sunrise. And I was amazed at how quickly those blackberries started heating up as soon as the sun hit them. Rain damage, of course, that would be pretty obvious, but that red droop thing has some linkages also for some other issues. Almost always what happens is rain makes this berry soft, of course. And then the bottom one, we have harvested warm and delayed cooling. See, look at that red again. Hey, have we seen this before, right? And then, of course, our favorite, which is gray mold hanging on the berries. Probably not, I can't see it as well here. That's the one, of course, nobody wants to see when they're out harvesting. So with the stage of maturity, Yeah, it's not like a strawberry. We can harvest it at 3/4 ripe. If you do that, you're going to have a really lousy tasting blackberry, and they really never do quite get that color. So it's kind of a giveaway that you don't have a fully ripe blackberry. And sometimes the druplets don't fully expand either. So yeah, they have to be full colored. However, there's another caveat, of course. You know, being a scientist, you're always looking for new challenges. There's something we called shiny black versus dull black, which is very easy to see on Navajo, and as we found out later, not so easy to see in a lot of varieties. Basically, dull black's just a little bit softer and tastes a whole lot better, but has a little bit more attenuated shelf life than a shiny black. So it's like, that's one of the reasons you're trying to walk through a field frequently during a week, so you can capture more of that shiny black pack. So we had a lot of evaluations that we used over the years when we were in Oklahoma. Some of them mostly subjective, which is what we started with. And it's mostly the easy things like, you know, what color was it, shiny or dull? How much mold and leak do we have in a pack? That's an easy one to characterize, yes or no. Firm or soft, we developed a little bit of an elaborate, you know, five-step rating system as to, you know, when you hold it in your hand, or, you know, I used to say, John, can you develop a blackberry you can throw against the wall and it won't bleed? And he did. And I think some of that material is now known as a cultivar release. And anywhere from, you know, soft was easy, it was mushy, it fell apart, and then the firm, and then that in-between stage, it's always hard to score. And then the druplet issues. You know, we would note that we had white drupe. We would note they had brown drupe. Well, it was a brown drupe from rust, is a brown drupe anthracnose, or is it brown drupe from sunburn that's gone a couple steps further? And then red druplet, of course. And then we had to come up with a summary score after a few years. It's like, I don't want to look at 15 columns, Penny. Can you do something with this and give me an overall score? So we came up with a marketable score that was based on the characteristics that first we thought were most important, but could be adapted based on either what a breeder thought was more important or what a grower thought was more important. Of course, decay in there, softness, and then we didn't have red drupe in there originally, but now we would consider it part of that score. And then the quantitative stuff. Weight loss was easy. Scales came down a lot in price, easy to capture that data. Colorimeter readings, not so easy, but colorimeters are easy to use. Ethyl union respiration, not so easy. Total soluble solids, easy, because there's lots of nice digital meters out there. Titratable acidity, I say easy, but we use a handheld titratable acidity meter now. We used to use a digital system, which was a little bit more expensive. And this is important because we all use pH instead because it's easy compared to trying to do titratable acidity. And you'll notice, I know that Carmen had some where she shows the pH being, you know, anywhere from low to mid-range, 3.2 to 3.8. And that usually correlates fairly well with titratable acidity. Firmness, quantitative firmness, yeah, that's another whole talk. But it's coming around, and I think we're getting there and what we can use. And then the total anthocyanins and phenolics and the other health attributes requires different sets of equipment and expertise. And then at the very end, I added volatiles and sensory, because these are finally doable. You know, I used to be doing a volatile chemistry on a crop was a huge, huge, huge deal. Now it's much simpler. It's still pricey, but we're gaining a lot more information. You know, when you have 400 volatiles coming off a crop, you also have to have the data system to manage that and figure out what's important and what isn't. And using students who are now trained in R makes that a whole lot easier to do than it used to be. And sensory panels are a little bit more commonplace than they used to be as well. So in post-harvest systems, I'm segueing into the other part here. You know, obviously the berries continue to be alive and respire and lose water, sugars, and then you have molds moving in to take advantage of that. So, of course, the key, usually with post-harvest, is always about reducing respiration. That's the first way you can get your shelf life extended and generally the easiest way. And there's simple things that growers have done over the years, and this is in North Carolina, but a couple systems that I thought resonated with the smaller growers was to harvest in the field, take advantage of the, here in the middle, let's see if I can get this to work. Here you have east-west rows. You notice you have shade on the west side when you're harvesting in the morning. So you can easily put your fruit over there in the shade as you're getting your pack together and save a little bit on the amount of heat they're building up. And then you have a couple systems here. This one on the top is one of those pullable trailers we saw yesterday, where you have it right in the field, you bring your fruit up, and it's immediately packed and put in that reefer to try and get some cooling started. On the other side here, this is another farm where instead what they do is they run the boxes back and forth. Their packing station isn't too far away, their packing shed, so they run it back and forth on golf carts about every 10 minutes. Let's see. Okay, so of course, when it comes to post-harvest, it's all about cooling for us. You know, we cannot get away from that, especially in the United States. We have the ability to do it, we have the electricity, and we have an easy source of refrigeration plus the setup for coolers that makes it very much part of our culture. This differs in other continents. But for us, when it comes to berries, we don't have many choices in how to cool them, pre-cool them. One is room cooling, which takes a long time. The other is forced air cooling, which is faster, but it means another level of management. We can't use water cooling and we can't use ice on blackberries, period. So that limits our choices, which may be a good thing and may be a bad thing. And then the other thing that's key with blackberries and really any of the cane fruits, refrigerated storage of less than 41 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty much the golden rule. Continues to be the best method and probably overall the most economically satisfactory method to extend your shelf life of blackberries. There's lots of places you can buy refrigerated coolers. Lots of times we tell people, you know, you can check on Marketplace or some others. There'll be people that are like McDonald's and some of the other ones are always trying to get rid of their cooling systems and put in new ones. So they're willing to make you a deal. Storeitcold.com, which is a wonderful resource for post-harvest, also offers these things for sale. They'll come to you on the back of a trailer truck. We actually developed our own pack and cool trailer early, let's see, what was that, about 2011 or 12. I had somebody who used to work for NASCAR that wanted to take this on. He saw a farmer had done it online, and he wanted to make his own. So it turned out really well. It's been very useful for us over the years. We've used it around North Carolina a lot. And the idea is that you can literally put this on the back of your truck, take it out to the farm. The second one that we made, has a generator built into it. And then we have the curtains in the back to make sure that we can keep the cold air in. So that's been pretty handy. Now, then we kept saying somebody needs to make these commercially because we couldn't possibly do it. American Trailers of the Carolinas, I'm passing this information on to y'all. There is a location around county in North Carolina, and they're still there. I was checking to see after the pandemic if they were still around, and yes, they are. But the nice thing is they'll sell these to you already done. So you don't have to worry about it. I don't know how much they are. I'm pretty sure that these trailers have jacked up a good deal in price. When we made the first one, it was about $4,200, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than that now. So whether it's practical still for people, it still offers an option, and we still get inquiries about it. Quickly, packaging, Angelos covered this yesterday. But another major factor that happened to coincide with blackberry development was the advent of the clamshell. Before that, it tended to be pulp containers, which are great, but don't have a lid, which means they're not stackable, at least not easily, and tend to be prone to movement out of the box. The nice thing about the clamshells is that you can design your own vent holes depending on what type of cooling system you're using and what type of master you're using. You can design your own. And of course, immediately the distributors moved in and said, hey, if you're going to be picking for us, we want you to use this type of box. So you always come up with another little hiccup. And then in that bottom corner, Irvin Lineberger used to use these, especially for his juicing berries, these little 1-gallon containers. The key is with blackberries, is like with any of the small fruits, you can't layer them more than 3 to 4 berries deep, or you start getting a crushing effect, and you get juice. Okay. Quickly, master flats. Again, Angelo's covered this, but it's important to have your vents aligned for your forced air system, and it's also important to, sorry, I keep missing the button. Okay. There. All right. I'm going to stop using the button. Basically, you're looking for those vents on the side of the container, and you're also looking for support on the corners to hold your system through. And then a couple other things we've tried. We never tried 1-MCP. I did a quick search through the literature, and as far as I can tell, 1-MCP doesn't have much effect on blackberries. Oxygen for berries, we want an oxygen level has to be around 10%, otherwise you get off flavor. And then it starts to taste fermented. And then 15%, maybe even 20% CO2 to slow down the fungal decay or block it. And it also happens to maintain titratable acidity. Just by accident, we somehow got a clog in our machine one day when we were doing this, and we ended up with 50% CO2. And I will tell you, those blackberries turned bright red. So that was really fun, kind of like, well, we can't publish this, but this is what happens when things go wrong. So what happened here, right? The blackberry industry grew and grew and grew, and it got really successful. And so what happened, demand started to be met, and then of course what happened was your vendors started demanding better product, and they're like, pick, and they're like, you got these red spots in your berries, we don't want them. And up until then, nobody had really had a complaint about it. Well, now it's established as a defect. So yet another obstacle for the breeders to deal with. And this reddening is different from a lot of the other reddenings. I showed you a lot of reddenings that happen from various reasons, but those all show up pretty much at harvest or an hour or so later. This one's weird because you start with a perfectly black fruit, and you put it in storage, and a day later you pull it out and go, what happened? Why are these red? Depending on, to me, I was not that discerning about red druplet. I think the one in the middle was fine. The one on the end was a problem. But now we have numbers of duplets that are red that becomes an evaluation issue. But what we found over the years has been, I used to tell John that you needed a PhD student to study this, and lo and behold, after I went to NC State, several PhD students started working on this in various institutions with various results. But basically, we were doing a small study in North Carolina that we were looking at temperatures of the berries all day and all night to see what happened to them. And unfortunately, we didn't get a particularly warm night, which was what we were hoping for. But what we did see was that definitely we had a little bit more red druplet occurring right around noontime. And then when we held it, it seemed to be into 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was, again, as minor amounts overall in the grand scheme of things, but it also happens to be associated with the temperature in the field, which is, in the end, underscores the need to get your fruit out of the field before it gets too hot. So what is red druplet? I'm showing you here, this one in the middle here is one that had rainfall. I was talking about the red. This is called almost a purplish red compared to this bright red that you see with red druplet. So what you have here is the red is actually because you have almost no anthocyanin. It's like half the anthocyanin in that druplet. That's in the black one. That's the pigment. And also, you've also basically damaged the vacuole, which is where anthocyanin is stored. It also happens to be where acids are stored. So when you have a black pigment like cyanidin and you lower the pH, it turns bright red. So you have two things going on together here. And depending on the damage, it can be more of a purple color or less red color or a bright red color. Now the question has always been why. We know that it seems to be variety by variety, and we see some varieties like Washita. I never had a problem with Washita, and now we seem to have a problem with it. Depends on the harvest date, depends on the year, depends on whether you had rainfall or not. Seems to now we have incidents with rapid cooling, with forced air cooling. We can see it especially on the top flat. Holding it at low temperature seems to induce it. Holding it at 41 degrees seems to make it a little bit better. And so what's going on? And there's been a whole study going on nutrient management as well. And sometimes nutrient management seems to be helpful. But what I thought was great yesterday was the Rose brothers were talking about that they think it's a bruising impact, and that it takes a while to show up in storage. It's like bingo. To me, that makes a lot of sense because you have a couple things going on here. Warm fruit, you're more likely to bruise it when you're pulling it off. And if it's rainy, it's going to be a little softer. If you have a variety that's a little softer, And it also explains some of this huge variation we see with harvest date to harvest date, year to year. And then the other thing is I was like, okay, so why would holding it at 41 degrees help it? And so what I'm thinking is it does a little bit of a slow healing thing. So you have multiple druplets. Some of them might be damaged more than others, and you can't reverse it. But some of those druplets that have a little bit milder damage may heal themselves at the warmer temperature, which then goes to the next point is what's happening at that cold temperature. Is the membrane drying out too fast so it can't recover? Or, I mean, I'm sitting here going, okay, another PhD project for somebody looking at the enzymes involved and membranes and, a whole bunch of microscopy going on here. So fun things. But I really think this, and it's great for me, because this something's been bugging me for years and I could never figure out how to induce it. And now I think if you go and start doing bruising, you might be able to prove it. Okay, so it migrated from Oklahoma, USDA back in 2008, moved to North Carolina at the Plants for Human Health Institute in Kannapolis, North Carolina. And here it was a little bit different. So we're not the mighty Blackberry breeding program that Arkansas has, even though we supplied some of the genetics that were used by Jim and John over the years. But what was interesting was Vaughn was probably the first really important Blackberry we ever released from the program. And it turned out they were ready to throw it away. And I said, listen, the post-harvest life is incredible on this thing. And it's sweet. Unlike some of the Arkansas material, the acids are a little bit less. So they went ahead and released it, and it's turned out to be a pretty good winner, particularly in Europe for long cane production. So it's one of those, go figure, who would have thought it would end up being used for long cane production? And then I have to put in a plug for this NC 7740, which is one of those super sweet varieties, 14% sugars. And so hopefully that will be coming along here in the next releases from North Carolina State. Over the years, we looked at organic blackberries as well. There's a project, and yes, organic blackberries don't differ in composition from conventionally grown. So that's another little check off the list that it's okay. The other thing that we did find in this study, there was a PhD student working on that. The other little reminder is that, okay, you've been really good about minding your cold storage and removing your heat, but all it takes is 2 days at room temperature after all that work for cold storage to undo it all. So things to keep in mind. Anthocyanins, and when it comes to blackberries, they're all in the cyanidin family. And what the heck does that mean, right? Okay, so unlike a blueberry, which has 28 pigments, blackberries basically have about 5 or 6. This is a good thing in many ways because they're all cyanidins. They're highly reactive against radical oxygen species. So they're like the first line of attack. The blueberry anthocyanins are a little different. They have multiple functions, different functions, but the cyanidins have a very important role in terms of human health. And another thing we were looking at were these traditional Chester thornless was one of the first improved varieties released with being thornless versus APF 45 primocane. What we found was that Chester thornless had twice as much anthocyanin, and they both had the same types of pigments in them. And the fact that Chester thornless has more anthocyanin may also help explain why APF 45 tends to show red druplet more. That it just doesn't have as much pigment there to start with. High benefits in blackberries, or health benefits. Most important thing by far is that it's high in dietary fiber. It's meeting your 10% daily requirement, which is pretty tough to do, especially for Americans. Provides calcium and vitamin C in relatively small amounts. High in manganese, another thing we tend to be lacking more and more of because we don't eat much bread anymore. And high in vitamin K, which is increasingly important for bone health. And then there's, of course, the anthocyanins, which are easy to talk about because they're so visual. And we always, of course, want plenty of those in our diet. Phenolic compounds have been much, much harder to pound your head against as to figuring out what they do, especially in gut microbe health and how they act. And one that came up recently in a publication was called protocatachoic acid, which tends to have anti-cancer effects. It tends to be in relatively high amounts in blackberry, so stay tuned for more in that area. And then one thing I had to laugh about was I came across a study where blackberries were shown to increase insulin sensitivity, which is good if you have a diabetes problem, and then also increase fat oxidation, which is good if you're overweight. The problem was you had to eat 600 grams per day, which is about 4 cups a day. And I have a hard time. I could do that with watermelon, but I have a hard time doing that with blackberry. So, yeah, and expensive, exactly. Yeah, you have to have your farm out there. But anyway, so these are the types of studies coming up. There's a huge growing interest in more and more studies. Finally the medical people are on board and much more interested in looking at foods in the way they were meant to be instead of taking extracts and making pills. So I think that's exciting news. So, of course, coming to the end of my career, it's like, what's coming up next? And that's why I asked this question about mechanical harvesting. Arkansas did this work back in the 70s on mechanical harvesting of blackberry. Justin Morris did this work. And it's just kind of ironic to see it popping up again. And of course, totally different venue. Still issues, of course. These still haven't been fixed, but certainly time. Packaging, clamshells are a no in Europe. So we have to come up with new plans to what we go to. And I thought, okay, these wonderful little cardboard things they've come up with, well, that was okay until the microplastics thing hit the news. So stay tuned on that. There'll be more. That's a whole other group that does that work, but that's another thing that we'll have to battle. Addition of coatings pre-harvest, chitosan coatings, nanoparticle chitosan coatings, interest in all kinds of coatings if you spray on the plants before they're harvested. Of course, this is all, again, since we're in the southeast, depends on our rainfall issues. Can we get it on there? Can we get it dry? What's going to happen if FDA finds out about it? All those things, there's new challenges coming up. The longer shelf life, okay. So I got to 28 days pretty easily with blackberries. 14 days still seems to be the standard. One paper I was reading went to 38 days. Like, whoa, wait a minute, now we're talking grapes. But I mean, I'm thinking 6 weeks. Okay, 42 days. How hard would it be to get to 42 days for a blackberry? A whole lot more doable than it was 40 years ago, for sure. Can we get there, and is it worthwhile? If you're doing container shipments, yes, it is. And hopefully we don't have to add too much to it. And nobody wants to have the aggravation of trying to do CA storage and all the other manipulations for container shipments. And then the other big question is, because of energy costs, can we get adaptability to store fruit at higher temperatures? That's been done a little bit with strawberries, where you hold the strawberries at room temperature for 24 hours and see what happens to them. Do they hold up to that? And that's a great way to screen. So that's what's happening ahead. Certainly for consumer marketing in the US, sweetness drives it. And less acid fruit definitely are appealing to consumers. Crisp blackberries, we have crisp grapes, we have crisp blueberries, we have crisp watermelon. Certainly I would think that was on the horizon for something that consumers will prefer, particularly if they, believe it or not, if they don't drop and leave a stain. We found that out with the firmer type watermelon. They were great because they didn't have juice everywhere, which I thought was an abomination. But it just depends on your personal preference. If you've got little kids running around, it's great to have something that's not going to drop and leave a mark. And then the consistently flavorful blackberries, things like the grape flavor that Carmen was talking about, possibly cherry-flavored blackberries, peach-flavored even. And then what I really like is the East-West genetics connection, where we have Twilight Galaxy and Eclipse from Oregon, which was originally paired up with a lot of the Arkansas genetics. And then recognition and incorporation into daily diets as a source of phytochemicals. And of course, we want those markets. We want new markets for high sweetness. We want repeat markets. One of the interesting things we found with blueberries is, believe it or not, most of the time when surveys are done of who buys the fruit in the family, or whatever fruit it is, it's the women making the decisions. But when it comes to blueberries, the men buy them. Why? We still don't know why. I assume with blackberries it would still probably be more female focused as to making these repeat purchases, especially if it's about health messages as well. But something to think about as you grow a new market for a fruit that's now established. Over the years, there have been many, many organizations involved and people. Certainly at my lab in Lane, Oklahoma, Julie Collins and Sheila Magby were the pillars of that program. Jim Moore, John Clark, and Renee Threlfell at Arkansas have moved the program so far. Gina Fernandez and Jim Ballington, breeders at NC State, as well as my lab at Jenny Ma, Joyce, Aaron, Mu Jung, and Christine Browdish, graduate students. And then, of course, Chad Finn and Bernadine Strict at Oregon. And then Drake School's Nature Ripe have been very helpful along the way in discussions. And Irvin Lineberger at Killdeer Farm and Steve Drake from Drake's Farm at Arkansas have all been involved in this. So that's the end of that. I don't know how we are doing on time.
We have time.
Okay. Well, if anybody's got any questions, thank you all for listening.
Time for questions if anyone has a question for Penny. All right, Carmen.
How closely related do you think firmness and lack of reversion are?
You know, at one time I thought that was the end of it, but John had a variety called 1800. It was a numbered line called 1800, and that got reversion. And that thing was one of the ones that you could throw on a wall and it wouldn't bleed. So I think the problem is with this, it's not as simple as just firmness. You know, there's some other stuff going on. And somebody was talking about the size of the drupelets and how certain vendors didn't like that. And I thought, well, you know what? They may be onto something there. Because the bigger the druplet, and you know how it is with blackberries, you get different druplet sizes. It's possible you're getting more pressure on that and it's thinning out more, and that may be part of another problem why we see variability.
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
This is not really on topic of the talk. It's kind of, but I have a really keen palate. I think that's half the reason that they kept me at the university after John retired, because I can taste a lot. I'd say I'm a super taster. And so I've picked up that we have a coconut aromatic in our program, but it always seems to be coming with bitterness. Do you know why that might be? Or if there's something about that compound that volatile?
I mean, I'm trying to think what amino acid is behind the coconut flavor, and I mean, it's an amino acid, so you're thinking they wouldn't share the same substrate pool, because usually bitterness is from a different pool of substrates in the cell. But I'm betting there's a common denominator in there somewhere, or it could be that something with a bitterness will shoot out that side product that tastes like coconut. I don't know my chemistry well enough for that, but that'd be something to hunt through and see if you could, or find a biochemist and say, hey, I got a question for you. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? All right.
In summary, Penny, all your years of studying the cool down process, what would be your recommendation to a new grower on what temp do you bring it down to? How quick? What's the best process for shelf life and or best chance at not getting the red druplet if cooling it too fast is causing it, or maybe it's not?
Yeah, if you have the luxury, I mean, the problem you have as a grower is you have somebody who's going to be by to pick up a truck of blackberries. You have 6 hours. But if it's under the best possible circumstances here, I would definitely, I mean, we were talking yesterday when somebody else had the same thing about gradually, two-step cooling, which I still think might work. Try and get it down to 41 degrees Fahrenheit fairly quickly. And then maybe drop it by increments down to 32, if that's doable. Not everybody can go to 32 for a cooler. But definitely slow it down a little bit and give it that. And again, it's going to be depending, hedging the bets here, but how hot was it coming in, right? If it was a fairly cool day and 70 degrees and you're harvesting, it's pretty easy to do, and you probably won't even see red drupe as badly because you haven't had the pressure on the fruit. But if you're talking the worst possible scenario where it's already 90 degrees when you bring it in, you get a heat load that's close to 100 in the middle of the pack, you're going to have to try and get it down to 41 degrees quickly, no matter what. And then maybe go the extra steps down, take another 2 hours, 3 hours, a little bit slower to get down to that lowest temperature. And then hold it I would say still hold it close to 32 as much as you can.
So quickly to 41, is that an hour? Is that 2 hours? Is that 15 minutes?
It depends on your load, right? And the forced air cooler. I'm thinking usually to get down to a full pallet of fruit down to 7/8 cooling takes usually about 2 hours. So yeah, probably about 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, Brent said it takes about an hour for him. And I know they do step-down cooling for Honeycrisp to prevent internal disorders. So like other fruit,
Right.
you know, some
Yeah.
harvest.
Yeah, now that we have more time, post-harvest people are, going back and fine-tuning things.
Yeah. Any other questions? I have one just final question. Do you feel like Caneberry marketers are doing as good of a job as like the blueberry marketers on promoting the health benefits to consumers? Could they do a better job?
Oh, blueberry people have the big dogs behind them. I mean, that's the major difference. You got the U.S. Blueberry Council. We don't have a U.S. Blackberry Council. I don't even think we don't even have a commodity group for Blackberry. And that makes all the difference in the world about what gets done. I mean, the watermelon growers did that very successfully because they already had a commodity group. And so the Blackberry thing is going to be harder. And you can certainly, you can definitely use the blueberry people and kind of use that as a momentum to start getting the Blackberry message across. And certainly one of the most effective ways for getting a media splashing on this is you try and get people who are in the human nutrition area to talk about blackberries. The problem is getting the money to them to do the blackberry research, and that's where it falls short. The Blueberry Council will give grants to people to work on microbiome work with blueberry. That's very expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So again, it becomes it's all about who's in your back corner and what can be done. Now, it's not to say it can't be done with muscadines. We beat our head on this wall forever. It's like we need a celebrity to promote muscadines. But all it takes, the other way to do this, is to get one of these AFRI grants or a SCREE grant, which is a USDA grant. If you can find the right people in the room, which SCREE grants are nice because they have a lot of involvement from growers and organizations that are involved directly in agriculture. A SCREE grant on Blackberry, which I know Margaret has done before, is very helpful because there's an awful lot of media that comes out of these, and it starts filtering the message through. It still takes a while to hook the nutrition people into it. It can be done. USDA has a very strict line that you cannot cross before you get into the NIH category of health. But we did it with elderberry. And so it's possible that's another approach that could be taken. I'm throwing these out here, but basically when you don't have a commodity group in your back corner, what do you do to advance your message? Obviously social media is a big one, and that's easier to do. But these are some other more established ways to go. Yeah, Carmen.
Also kind of not related, I don't know. Who would start a commodity board?
Oh, it's a huge job. I think Amanda
a politician? You're going to do it? Matt's going to be the president? That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's getting agreement among people, and then if you're doing an assessment, that's usually where the rubber hits the road. People have to agree to the assessment and all the oversight costs involved with working with the USDA.
Thank you. That was really great. Super informative. We appreciate you. Thanks, Dr. Perkins.